Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Okay, great. Hello, sorry. I was getting it so that I could see you better. How are you doing this afternoon?
Doing well. I've had my coffee. I've got a beautiful view of the river here. Beautiful day.
Wonderful. Great. Well, for those of you joining us on through the Arkansas Symphony Orchestra website, through Facebook, through Instagram, through any different ways, I am so happy to introduce Andrew Crust to our community here. He will be conducting the Arkansas Symphony Orchestra this weekend with a fantastic program, and which, of course, he'll get to say more about during this call. And so he's in Little Rock, and we're just so excited to have you here.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We had one rehearsal already last night, and things are going so well. It's been really nice.
Good. Yeah, you kind of well, one reason I'm excited to have you here is because you actually had to get postponed because the orchestra really, really wanted to see you, and um we were afraid that the week that you were here in January that we would end up with our musicians getting sick or possibly even you getting sick. And we're like, no, we really want to perform with Andrew. So thank you for being accommodating and letting us switch the concert schedule till now.
Absolutely. And as you know, I'm actually doing the Shostakovich Symphony next week in Vancouver, so it's going to be so fresh in my mind after this week, which is great.
Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, that's wonderful. Like, yeah, so you had your first rehearsal last night. Um, I've got a question on that because I was thinking about it. So you're playing it next weekend in Vancouver. Do you prepare any differently for, say, Arkansas Symphony versus Vancouver? Or if you had started with Vancouver first versus us, like what do you what's your prep style?
There wouldn't be, I don't think, a difference between orchestras other than Vancouver, where, as you know, I work. I've been with that orchestra for 3 years as associate conductor. I know them, so I know their style and their strengths and all of these things. So perhaps it might be slightly different, but to me, the music is the music, and you prepare it sort of in the same way. But of course, when you come to an orchestra you've never met before, there are a lot of variables. You don't know the personality, you don't know the concert hall, you don't know any of these things. I was going to say unfortunately, but it's the opposite. Luckily, I actually know a lot of the players this week from my time in Memphis. A lot of
Ah,
players have played there as well, so I've got a lot of friendly faces in the orchestra this time.
oh, good. Yes, you've got a really, I mean, for someone so young, you've got a really extensive conducting experience. So how you were at Portland, Maine, and then how long were you at Memphis Symphony?
Memphis was 2 years. I was the assistant conductor there, and I also ran the youth symphony program. So 2 years there, and then I went to Vancouver as associate. I've been there for 3 years, and I'm also the music director of the Lima Symphony in Ohio, not Lima, Peru. So Lima, Ohio. I've been finishing out my second season. I started during the COVID year as music director there, which was quite interesting.
Oh, wow. That would be interesting because I'm sitting here thinking, okay, normally with a music director's first year, you're like, oh, we'll do some bigger orchestra. We'll like, how did you do it the very first year during COVID?
Well, it was very strange. I didn't get the chance to go out and meet everyone in the community as I wanted, and there wasn't a big, announce and a celebration as there usually is. But we did keep the music alive, and we filmed programs as a lot of people did, and we actually released those programs on drive-in movie theaters.
Oh,
And
wow.
people came and instead of clapping, they honked their horns, right? And so we did Nutcracker and some Copland and Beethoven concerts. We managed to get a big enough orchestra on stage to do Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto, and we did, like I said, the Nutcracker in a smaller version. But we kept it alive. We did a few concerts. It wasn't the grand, beginning to a tenure that I would have liked, but we made up for it, I think, this season, and we're going to continue to do that.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So you would film it and then air it on the drive-through?
Yeah, and also in Vancouver, as I was telling you yesterday, we recorded piles and piles of concerts once it was safe to actually be in the concert hall, and it had to be a smaller orchestra, right? And so we discovered a lot of great new music that I had not known for the smaller orchestras. Like we did the Wynton Marsalis Fiddler's Tale and the Coleridge Taylor Noveletton, and I did some Pert and all of these wonderful things that we don't get to do so often. So obviously none of us wanted this to happen, but we made it work somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at your conducting schedule like consistently. I hear you during COVID, it was busy, but it's still really busy for you. Um, and I was looking at the repertoire that you were conducting. I was like, it's not like you're doing Shostakovich 9 the whole year. Like you have a vast amount of repertoire you're doing. So how do you balance that? Do you just go like today's my Disney day, today's my Shostakovich day? Like how do you organize all that?
Oh, it's a challenge. And I think you get better and better at learning scores quickly. But of course, in an ideal world, you let a score sort of simmer for months at a time. You don't want to just dive in and start marking cues and things. You want to just really absorb it. You want to be reading the biography about the composer. You want to be understanding the time period. But when you've got a season like I do this year, you have to prioritize. You have to think months in advance in terms of what needs the most work, what is the least familiar to me. But I've got a pile of scores at home that are organized by month, and I use my little journal here. I don't know if
Uh-huh.
you've heard of bullet journaling is one way I sort of stay on track. It's a sort of a way of systematizing your entire life and making sure you're in the right place. But it's a challenge. But that's why I wanted to do music. There's never any end to this learning, and I might do Shostakovich 9 50 times in my life, and I'll never stop studying it, even on time number 49. There's just more to learn. So this year's been a bit wild, and I'm in the place where I'm now able to program things that I know well, and then just sprinkle in some new discoveries, so it doesn't become overwhelming. So everything on this program that we're doing, I've done, except the Shostakovich, I haven't done in 10 years. But the Borodin I did a couple weeks ago, and the Tchaikovsky, I think, is just a classic for all musicians.
Right. Right. And this is an all Russian program. And I'm wondering, like, because a lot of times when you're looking at the program, it's not necessarily composers from all the same country. So, what was inspiring to you about this program?
Well, that kind of was the initial impetus. Was that, of course, this was programmed quite some time ago. Uh, Interesting to note that this is an all-Russian program today, but that brings up, a lot of interesting questions, and I don't know how much of that we want to get into, but I think it's important to realize that not all people of a country at war are in agreement with what's going on, right? I mean, there are obviously the victims are the Ukrainians first and foremost, but so are a lot of people in the country of Russia itself, and I think these composers, especially Shostakovich, have been the victims of authoritarianism, and so if it seems a little strange that this is an all-Russian program, I think it actually brings up some good points. But that was the initial plan, was to celebrate this sort of style and sound of music, this all in one place.
Mhm.
And Russia has, such a tradition of art that has a really distinct style. And these composers were all somehow related to St. Petersburg. There are just so many deep connections in the sound world, I think, and it's a great kind of music to feature an orchestra and all the different sections of an orchestra. So not only does the audience get to enjoy that, I get to learn about this orchestra, in particular the Shostakovich, which is just full of solos for everybody.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, I hadn't thought about it that way. We'll give you a real chance to, yeah, get to hear our wonderful players in different individual roles. Oh, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
honestly, it's hard to choose a better piece for that. The
Mhm.
Shostakovich. I mean, you think of audition excerpts. There are many in this piece that you see at every audition. For woodwinds, the fourth and fifth movements are practically a bassoon concerto. There's a violin solo. There's a great trumpet solo, trombone solo, piccolo solo. So it's the whole world of the orchestra is there. So I'm getting to know the orchestra very well this week.
Yeah. Now, did that kind of, okay, now thankfully you knew our players, but I'm just sitting here thinking, would that kind of scare you? Normally you go, oh, there's a lot of solos in this. I hope they can do it. Or you're just like, nope, we're going to go with Shostakovich 9 and see what happens.
I mean, you gotta assess the orchestra that you're working with, and of course, I recommended this program, and then I trusted the people here in Little Rock to say this is going to be great for our orchestra, or or sometimes they say, well, we've been doing too much of this lately, or maybe our strength is more of the German style or something. And the one
Mhm.
thing I will say about this program is that I oftentimes for weeks like this, I choose programs which have more diversity in them in terms of style, but also every kind of diversity. It's nice sometimes to do one sort of sound world, but this is a music director search year, and I think the important thing to know is that I'm sure most of the candidates would have a very diverse approach to their programming, and it's not going to be all Russian or all German all the time or all dead white guys.
Right.
Now that is something I'm very interested in. It doesn't happen to be represented in this particular program, as good as this program is.
Right. That's good. Yeah, and I was you have a lot of experience with your youth ensembles, but also in the education program. So I kind of, so one question I have is what led you, like, when did you wake up and go, okay, that's what I want to pursue music, even if it wasn't conducting, but how did you fall in love with the music?
I think I have a very musical family, not in the classical music world, but they all have very good ears. My stepfather is a musician. He plays in bands. He plays guitar. He sings. He plays every instrument that could be in a band. So I grew up hearing him in his band practice. I also have all of my parents, including my step parents, listen to this wide array of music. I grew up. My mom would be blasting out of our home speakers. It could be anything from Mozart Requiem to Les Mis to Christina Aguilera to the Beatles to Ella Fitzgerald. My dad, I learned about the blues and classic rock and Louis Armstrong and James Brown, and so I had this diverse array of music that I'm sitting there listening to, and I think I realized pretty early on that I had a good ear. The
Hmm.
story that I could sing all of Christine's aria from Phantom of the Opera when I was 4 years old
Oh, wow.
in the right octave.
Oh my gosh, I'm like, that goes really high.
Yeah. So I mean, I had this ear, and I just was a natural nerd in high school. I had some very close friends who were really good musicians. There was a really great music program. I was very immersed in jazz and classical. I started composing, busking in the street in Kansas City, and so it was always a big part of my life. But I didn't have anybody telling me what I should do to become a musician professionally. My teachers didn't tell me that. So I didn't really figure that out until the end of high school. And I thought, well, I think I really need to do this forever, or at
Uh-huh.
least a career. How do I go about that? So I kind of figured it out on my own. And then I ended up following a teacher who came into my school and just played some chamber music. And I followed her to Wichita State. And
Ah.
then ended up leaving the next year. But from Wichita State, I went to McGill, where I started my conducting side, and then I went to University of Colorado Boulder to finish it up with my doctorate. So, there wasn't one moment that I realized I wanted to do it. I think it was kind of a slow burn.
Yeah. Lots and lots of different inspirations, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think that's the great thing about music. And I also, I wasn't forced into it, and nothing against those people who are.
Mhm.
They have a head start,
Mhm.
but I think for me, it feels like a very genuine path, and that I discovered it on my own without anyone in my world telling me what that should be, or what kinds of things you need to do. So I think that's hopefully an asset.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking about, yes. We just had Tommy Lee on here and she talked a lot about the idea of cross-pollination and looking at music as music and not getting hung up on organizing things in different ways. And so I'm listening to you, I'm like, gosh, that's how you learned, was just different influences and different things. Louis Armstrong.
It is music, right? Yeah, I mean, and that's how people like Mozart lived their lives. It was not this clinical thing. To imagine that his music would be used in auditions. Like every clarinet player has to play the exposition of his concerto at every audition. That would be mind-boggling to him, right? This is stuff you play. This is stuff he wrote for a concert the next week, and this mixture of folk music and all different kinds of things. It was real live performance, and it's so old now. Some of this music that we put it on this pedestal, but it was all living, breathing music, and I think all styles of music are equally valid. So it's wonderful.
Yeah. Okay, we have some questions here. All right. Oh, here's a quick one. What's your main instrument and do you still play?
Yes, I play. Well, I my main instrument was trumpet actually, and I played horn and French. Sorry, and piano a little bit now as well. Don't tell the string and players that I'm a brass player. But it's tough. That instrument is hard to keep up. It's like being an Olympic athlete. If you don't train for 1 week, it starts to go away. All the muscles in the brass, are right here, and you start to lose that. So I don't play as much as I used to, but I do play piano, and I'm just immersed in music all the time. So it's you make up for it in some way.
Right. Okay. Here, what's it like juggling various orchestras? So, what does your year look like?
Oh, well, it depends on the year. I mean, I do a full season with my orchestra in Ohio, and then I do a lot of concerts in Vancouver. This year, I probably had, I don't know, 10 weeks of concerts in Vancouver or something. And there are some years I did maybe 35, 45 concerts there. Um, so it's a bit chaotic at the moment.
Hmm.
Slow down, but I'm also doing a lot of guest conducting this year, and that's it's exciting. And you try and find the pieces that you really want to champion, and bring as often as you can, and you gain more and more familiarity with those, as I mentioned before, and then you sprinkle in some new discoveries. So it's a tough balancing act, but there's as you were talking about planning for score study. It's like, when do you start on the next project? And you never feel as a musician like you are prepared. I'm sure that even Yo-Yo Ma would say that, doing the Dvorak cello concerto. Because there's never an end to the amount of knowledge you can have about a piece, or the comfort you can have, which is why I like music. But at the same time, it can be kind of crippling and exhausting when you're coming up to the week of the concert, and you're thinking, do I know this as well as I want? Of course you do. Of course it's going to be great.
Right.
But you have your own standards, which just continue to expand to ridiculous levels, right? So
Yeah.
it's this mental game that I think all musicians play. Of course, that's similar in many different fields, but for us, it's kind of a way of balancing. You have to trust your preparation and your training, and kind of give in at some point to the process, and just let yourself kind of go. Of course, maybe some people don't have this problem, but I tend to be a perfectionist.
Uh-huh. Yeah. No, I was sitting there thinking, okay, so I played the cello in college and thought I was going to be professional. Anyway, I've played whatever, but I decided I didn't really want to pursue it as a career, playing my cello, because I was like, you're never there, right? I'm never going to get this chord exactly the way I want it. Or like, so that was part of my thought process, because I was like, oh, it's this never ending quest. So I like how you just said you just got to lean into it and trust it, and just go with it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's part of, the thing you don't tell high school kids, that you're going to be grappling with this. And of course, you can always turn on Spotify and listen to Gil Shaham or whoever you want, and think, well, I may be amazing, but will I ever achieve that? You always
mhm.
models that are there, and it's just, you have to just accept it. And yeah, it's a tough mental game.
Yeah, yeah. Um, yes, yeah. Sorry, I just have never heard anybody say it out loud, but those were definitely in my things that were in my head when I was like, is this really the career I want to pursue? Because, and I was always thinking about, well, there's always another cellist that's going to play it better. And you said Gil, so I was thinking about Gil Shaham. He was here recently, and I'm not sure the man ate. I just kept thinking, do we need to get you some breakfast or lunch? But turns out he was always in the practice room, like he was practicing and playing the barber. I mean, it felt like the minute he woke up to the minute he performed, he was just in there, and he was like, "Well, you never have it exactly what like you never perfect it." Because I was
Mhm.
like, if there's anybody that knows the bar violin concerto by now, it's Gil Shaham, right? But there he was in there practicing.
I mean, that's the mark of a true artist, someone who not
Yes.
only does he know that he can continue to get new depth, but he can not only enjoy do the practice because he needs to, but he's probably loving it. He has this mental state where he can really enjoy that toil on that work, and going
Mhm.
from city to city to city. It's these people are brilliant.
Yeah, yeah. Now you alluded to pieces that you champion, pieces that you find. So one of the questions in here is, what pieces are you champion? Which pieces are you really excited about right now?
Well, we all have so many, favorites. Usually it's whatever's on my desk at the moment. So right now I'm most excited about this program. But my favorite composers, I often put Brahms and Mahler at the top of the list. But I really do like to support living composers because everybody was a living composer and they need the support now, and their music is really relevant. One of my favorite pieces I did this year was by Wynton Marsalis. Now you know I'm a trumpet player who likes jazz and classical, so we did his Fiddler's Tale, which is like a kind of inspired by the Stravinsky Soldier's Tale, similar,
Okay.
same instrumentation, but infused with this jazz style, and yet it's still very neoclassical, and it has this blues sort of element to it. It's such a fantastic piece of music. What else? I mean, I really like William Grant Still as well. I like his music, and I think it's getting a lot of playtime recently, which is fantastic. I just did his first symphony in Ohio, and I love it. It's such Americana, it's got all of the styles that we just immediately recognize. So I'm going to try and do that one everywhere I can. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, and there's a great composer in British Columbia I was telling you about yesterday, Jocelyn Morlock, that I really love her music. It's got this minimalist sound, but really quirky and colorful language to it. And I'm playing one of her pieces, I think, 3 times around the U.S. next season. So there's so much to discover. I can't give you one person, but for me, Brahms is kind of the heart, and Brahms and Mahler, as I said once before.
Mhm. Yeah, I was noticing that you had a doctorate, which is really, I was like, wow, okay. Again, you've done a lot, but your doctorate was emphasis on Brahms. And I'm wondering, in pursuit of your doctorate, did that influence your conducting in general, or did it influence your conducting of Brahms? Like, tell me more about how that impacted you moving forward as a musician.
Yeah, I did part of my doctorate dissertation on creating a performing edition of the four Brahms symphonies. And what that means is basically, well, there's this guy Fritz Steinbach who lived during Brahms' time, and he would conduct the pieces, and Brahms would be there with him in the rehearsals. And so he had all these markings in his score that basically Brahms had signed off on these things. So these are ideas that Brahms didn't write in. Take some time here, take a breath here, speed up here, change this articulation. Things that you don't write in the music, but are stylistic choices that are made.
Mhm.
So those scores are now lost. But there was this German guy, Walter Blume, who took those annotations and he wrote them down in German in prose. And then another guy, Pasternak, English speaker, translated that German prose into English. So now I took that English translation of prose, which is a translation of markings, and I put those back into the full score of the four
Uh,
symphonies. So it's a roundabout way of thinking, okay, this is an interpretation that Brahms himself signed off on. So I did learn a lot about Brahms in that, and I learned about performance practice during Brahms' lifetime in the late 1800s, and that was fascinating because some of it we still do today, naturally. Other
mhm.
things we would be shocked if someone did. Like, there's no way that that would sound tasteful in this day and age, and that's quite interesting because it makes you wonder, like, should we actually try and do precisely what someone in Brahms' time did, or have our brains changed? Do we interpret different things in different ways? Do
Okay. Uh, what do we do? There you are.
did you lose me or did I lose you?
It appears that we lost you through technical difficulties. Um, so you were We were talking about Brahms, and one thing you were talking about that I was just so curious about was like that would shock us today. I'm like, what in the world could that possibly be that would shock us today?
Yeah, well, there were strange little things like put a little breath after every single note in the phrase and like really parse it out. Like, and there were other things where he actually changed some of the rhythms to be, like in the Baroque period, there might be some rhythms which are notated one way, but tradition tells us to play in a different way. There was some of that even going on in the late 1800s, and yeah, and I was meant. I don't. Did you hear me talking about? If I'm repeating myself, let me know. But it brings up these interesting questions of should we even try and perform the things now like they were then? Because I mean, the question is, have we changed our perception now uh,
Right.
of what these emotions are, or how to portray these emotions? And would it actually be more appropriate to play it in a 21st century natural way? So it's interesting
Yeah.
how these little concepts change over time. Because I mean, the 1880s, that was a long time ago.
Yeah. That's a really good point. It's so interesting to me, and I've got another question for you, but the idea of music sort of being more like poetry or novels, because I'm sitting here thinking, God, that would be, you could read a novel and go, oh, is that how we would see it today or not see it? But the same thing applies in music. I had never really thought about it that way. Um,
Simple gestures that people would understand clearly in one way, then we don't understand in the same way. It might have the opposite reaction. And little things like apparently the ancient Greeks, they didn't play their scales going down and up. They
uh,
started up and they went down. So
no,
what does that do to your mentality? It's just interesting things like this. It's impossible to know how someone would have interpreted these ideas back then.
right. Okay. I know, I'm sorry. I know this is nerdy conversation, but it was really interesting to me because I'm like, gosh, I've never really thought about any of this way. Um, all right. I'm looking at these questions. One of them is, who are your musical influences, heroes, mentors?
Oh, well, I think every American composer has to think about Bernstein. That's an impossible figure to ignore in terms of, I mean, everything he did. Last week, I just was in San Jose watching the opera there do West Side Story, and just made me think of how easily he could write in all different styles. He wrote a Broadway musical that's full of jazz, and
Mhm.
yet he could very easily go and give a lecture on music and linguistics at Harvard, or he could go conduct the Vienna Philharmonic in like a recording of Mahler, which is seen as quintessential, and then he could speak to the public about the Beatles or all of these things. And so I think he's a great model for us all in terms of an impossible intellect, but an American kind of musician and figure. I think that we can all aspire to be, and it's about spreading the word about this music in a time in which people don't know nearly as much about classical music as they used to, as the common person did. I mean, when Bernstein was alive, especially in the 60s and 70s, everybody in America knew who that was. Uh, you ask somebody today and they're 30 years or younger, and they might not have any clue, and that's just the reality we live in. And so I think we have to carry his legacy forward and try and keep this music alive and well. And so he's been of a big inspiration. I never met him. He died in 1990.
Mhm.
But I've had a lot of teachers that have completely uh, shifted and changed and molded my musical thinking. It's can't even list them all, but I think you mentioned people like Gil Shaham, who was just there, and Yo-Yo Ma, we mentioned earlier. These are people I think that are also models to me because they, no matter the success they achieve, they are the most humble people. They're just happy to be where they are. They're happy to share the music. Doesn't matter if it's a room full of 12 people or 5,000 people. Um, so I mean, there are endless models there. Those are some people that stick out to me.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, Gilshahan was just equally gracious to we had little children that are taking violin and they came to the rehearsal and he was just as gracious to them as to everybody else in the room. I like that point that it's still about music. And one of the things we talked about yesterday was your art, which I'd like to get to, but one of the reasons why you like the art is because it's something that you can create, and you see the role of conductor as something different. Can you expand a little in terms of how you see the role of the conductor?
Yeah, we were talking about my visual art, which I do as a sort of a hobby and side job, actually. But I see that as obviously creative, right? You're making something. But a conductor, when you really think about it, and everybody will say, "No, you are creative." Not really. You create, you put programs together, I suppose. But my job is not to create; it's to interpret something that someone else already created. It's like a stage director in a way, but there's even less freedom, I think, because a stage director can decide, "Oh, I'm going to do Macbeth in 1950s Boston," or I'm going to tell the actor to go on this part of the stage or that. I'm just trying to do what the composer wanted, and we have this script, here, and
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty vague actually at what's on the score. You have these little dots and lines, and there's a lot that's between this information that you have to interpret. But in the end, you really are just trying to do what they said. And because this is such an imperfect kind of notation, um, that you have even a bigger responsibility to try and figure out what that was. And so, yeah, I don't see conducting. And on top of that, you don't make a sound. You influence the sound, right? So you're,
Mm-hmm.
you're literally not creating anything as a conductor. And so, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons I do enjoy making art is because you can actually make something and with your hands. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Tell us, tell us a little bit more about your visual art.
So it's sort of was a hobby, and then now it's become a little bit of even of a side job, and I like to do a lot of my art is portraits of people or figure drawing or painting, but it started out a lot often as portraits of musicians because I
Oh.
wanted to draw these people, Mahler, Brahms, whatever. So, and I kind of came up with an interesting style which integrated the musical notation into the drawings and in ink or watercolor. But these days I do a lot of digital with this app called Procreate, which is amazing. You've got your Apple Pencil on your iPad, and you can do any kind of painting you want. And so I enjoy it, but it's a bit like I don't want to compare myself to Mahler, but he called himself a Sommerkomponist, a summer composer, because he was so busy conducting during the year that he could only compose in the summer. And
Yes.
for me, I mean, there are weeks I just get so busy with music that I can't do a single piece of art. But then the minute I have a chance, that's all I want to do.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's also like kind of a flow state for me. When you're studying a score, it's hard to really because it's all intellectual in your mind, right? Unless you're playing it at the piano, it's hard to kind of get into this flow. But when I'm making art, it's just the hours just fly away. I think a lot of people have different hobbies like that, and I only stop when I absolutely am exhausted, and I have to stop, and that's it's
Mhm.
kind of it's kind of enjoyable.
Yeah. Gosh, I hadn't thought about that with the studying of the scores. I mean, of course, you're not actually, I don't know. Okay, so, all right. I'm just picturing Bugs Bunny here. I guess in my head, I was like, you're studying it with your hands, but you're not, are you? You're listening to it and learning it.
Yeah, I mean the
Yeah.
technical side. When you're a young student, of course, you're very concerned about that. But I barely think about that anymore. There are, of course, moments you have to think. Okay, there's a fermata. How do I show? Is there a cutoff here? Do I, you do. But I'm not sitting in the mirror and planning these things out. Just like I think an actor is not going to be sitting in the mirror all the time and planning out every single little gesture. It has to have some freshness and naturalness to it. So yeah, it's really about digging into the score. The technique, if you know the music, that will come naturally. I think the better you know the music, the more that will happen naturally. So it's a very intellectual and lonely kind of thing. And I don't always play the scores fully on the piano to learn. I often will just try and read it, on my own, um, which is entirely an intellectual thing and not physical at all. So it's interesting.
Um, all right, we have a lot of questions in here. How do you approach rehearsing with a new orchestra?
That's where the magic happens. I wish more people would come to rehearsals because it's really interesting. The final product. I really hate it when I listen to orchestra concerts and I hear people talking about the conductor. Did you see what they did? Look at how energetic they are. It's like, who cares about the conductor in a performance, really? Like the work is in the rehearsals, and I think I try and be very careful at how I structure those, but a lot of it is in the moment. It's live. You have to be able to really sense the psychology of the room.
Mhm.
You might have a plan of how you want to approach the rehearsal, but then you look out at these 60 people and you sense, okay, it's time to move on, or okay, I'm way too much in the weeds. I've been doing too many details. Let's just play for a while. And so you do have a structure where you want to get to these certain things, um, but then of course you have to respond to the real life reality, and that's always different. Depends on the day, the hall, the people, and so I have a sort of a structured plan in my mind of what I want to get to and in what kind of time. Usually I like to start by just playing the entire piece. you
Okay.
know, I think the fastest way to get, run out of town by musicians is if you start your first rehearsal by just like getting in the weeds immediately and stopping and fixing things. You have to just read through it, right? Um,
Uh,
so that's kind of my first general flow is it's interesting. People have been in their own practice rooms learning their one part, and then it comes together, right? So it needs a moment to just sort of coalesce and breathe. And I think that's a really enjoyable moment because you can relax, you can listen and kind of hear. Yesterday was my first time with the orchestra, and as we're reading through the piece, I'm kind of learning about the personality of the orchestra and what kinds of finesse I need to have to match to fit into that personality.
oh wow. Okay. Can you change your finesse? I'm like, well, I don't know if I have different finesse styles. Do you have different finesse?
Well, there are orchestras that really like to like be just work on these little details and like really work hard on these things, and there are other orchestras that don't want you to talk very much. Just show us with your body, and or use some very basic words, and it's not always a good match. That there are many many conductors and many many orchestras, and there are people who show up sometimes in different cities or countries, and it's like our styles don't jive. But you have to adapt on both sides, and I think that's what's exciting is you have all these new perspectives from not only the players but the conductors, and it's always interesting. It's you're always learning something. Or there may be a piece you've done a million times, and some principal bassoon will have some way of playing it or some perspective that completely changes your whole thought process. So it's always fresh.
Yeah. Nice. Okay. Um, well, that was one question I had. It's not on the Q&A, but like how do you conduct if because you conducted in a lot of different countries, and I don't know how many languages you speak, but have you conducted an orchestra where you didn't actually speak the language? And if so, how do you conduct that group?
I have been in that situation, and I always feel embarrassed. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I go to countries and people speak English and you're just clueless about their language, right? And you're just like, wow, is this? Luckily, I have learned another language, and as musicians, I mean, we all learn a bit of Italian, German, French, and all these things. But I have been in that scenario, and actually, it was pretty fun because it allowed me all musicians know the Italian words for everything. You can say più mosso or più piano, which everyone knows, softer or faster. And you can
Yeah.
say più leggero, lighter. Every musician knows all of these words in Italian, so you can use those words. But you can also just use the score, right? In the score, it says these things. It says, all of this information. So if you just do that, but it also allowed me to really just try and show with my hands in those moments. If I couldn't translate it, now I have the challenge of physically showing it, and I think all of us conductors should be able to do that. And we rely too often on our words, and we should actually just be quiet and show it. And it also saves time. It's more efficient and sometimes even more effective. And if you use a bunch of words, it's kind of boring sometimes to a musician to say, play it on in this way, put your bow on here on the string, or play it softer. It's more interesting to show some uh, metaphor or poetic way of approaching it. Like, can this be more misty? Okay, what does that mean? How do I now everyone's brain is engaged in a different way rather
Uh-huh.
than okay, I put my bow here, I do exactly like this. So
Right.
yeah, it is a challenge, but luckily, pretty much everywhere you go, somebody in the orchestra is going to speak English and can help you if you're in trouble.
Hmm. But I guess those orchestras, when they're hiring someone that doesn't speak their native language, that they're counting on you to be able to show it.
Yeah, and but it's usually not an issue anywhere I've been. There have been a couple small towns in like even in the Czech Republic. I was there once, and almost nobody spoke English. Of course, in Prague, everybody speaks English, but um, yeah, it's an interesting challenge.
Okay, here's one. Here's a question. You described the orchestras as having different personalities. As the music director of multiple orchestras currently, does that present challenges or interesting opportunities for you as the conductor?
Good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm music director of one orchestra currently and an associate conductor in Vancouver, but the question still stands. Yeah, I mean, you have to realize the culture around every orchestra, and then some things may be really possible in one place and might not be so possible in another place, depending on the sort of desire of the orchestra to go in one direction or another. Some orchestras might really want to do a tour. Some orchestras might really want to do a recording project or really want to do a contemporary music series. Other orchestras might want to do a Beethoven festival, and so um, yeah, you go in the direction of where the orchestra is, and the orchestra comes in your direction too. It's this give and take, I think. But it's really more just about the individual personalities and what kind of strengths people have. And of course, within the orchestra, you identify those people who like to do things such as work with kids or speak to the patrons and go to play chamber music, which this orchestra does a lot of. I think chamber music is one of the best things an orchestra can do. So it takes a while, but I think when it clicks, it really is exciting because everyone's on the same page, and that's a really fun place to be. And from what I can tell, this orchestra has a really nice personality. Obviously, everyone's on their best behavior this week, including me. But they really want to work, and I think they're loving this music, and it's an exciting time for the orchestra.
Hmm. Yeah. One thing I've noticed just going to the concerts is how much one I've missed the concerts, but and I guess that's it. 2 years without really getting to hear the entire orchestra and then be in the concert hall with the audience members. It's just, oh, I'm so thankful that we get this chance to do it. So even we have concerts, a lot of concerts right now, but I'm like, it doesn't. I'm enjoying getting to hear concerts every week with our musicians, and I've just missed it so much. There's something magical about being in the concert hall, and then also during COVID, we could only put 12 of them on stage, so it's really nice to get to hear the full brass and anyway,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
excited.
I mean, it reminded us how valuable what we do is. So that was one upside.
Um, okay, here's one. Desert Island Piece. One piece you would never get tired of studying conducting.
Uh, I would have to say Gustav Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde, Song of the Earth. He wrote it because he was afraid of the curse of the ninth. All these composers dying after their ninth symphonies. Beethoven being the most famous one, but so many others. Schubert, Vaughan Williams, Bruckner, all these people, and he had a heart condition, right? And he knew that something could happen in his life at any time, and he had dealt with so much loss in his life, and so he wrote this symphony, which wasn't a symphony because it had two vocal soloists in it, but is a symphony, and he thought he could get around this curse, but it's one of the most profound things you've ever heard, and it's the text is from ancient Chinese poetry, um, all about life and the celebration of life, but also the tragedy of how short we have on this planet and how to come to terms with that mentally. And it's an hour long, you know, and the final movement is 30 minutes long by itself. It's called Abschied, or farewell, and it's kind of Mahler's farewell to this planet, you know, and it's just the most profound and meditative music you've ever heard, and monstrously hard for the orchestra and the singers. But you know, it's something I got to do in my master's, and since that moment, it's been just sort of an obsession with me. This piece is absolutely wild, and it has so much depth. You could never end with your study on that piece.
Okay. This weekend, we haven't talked that much about the music for this weekend. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about it?
It's a great program. I think the orchestra's really excited about it because it's got something for everybody. And yeah, so we start with the Polovtsian dances by Borodin, and he was mostly a chemist, actually. Speaking of people who were doing summer composing or something, he was the illegitimate son of a Russian prince, and according to the custom at the time, he was assigned sort of as the son of a serf. He wasn't allowed to be the son of the prince, but the prince made sure that he had a good education. So he did have a lot of training, but he ended up being a chemist. At the same time, he was this amazing composer, and he was actually sort of inducted into this so-called mighty handful of composers: Balakirev, Rimsky-Korsakov, Cui, Mussorgsky, and him. And these are guys who are, I mean, Rimsky-Korsakov, a legendary composer, the teacher of Stravinsky, and here's this chemist that's elected to this group, and tells you how good he was even as a hobbyist. And he wrote this opera, Prince Igor, which is about a 12th century prince going out to try and conquer this Tartar tribe, and it doesn't go so well for him, and he gets captured. And then we go to the Khan. We go to the Khan's encampment of these Polovtsian people, and there's a big celebration where everyone has to sing and dance for the Khan and praise the Khan. But I think actually the more touching part is, I just did this with chorus. Actually, the original has chorus. I did it in Ohio, and so you get to hear the text. And the opening is this very beautiful song, and it's about these Polovtsian people are forced away from their homeland, and I have the music here. Actually, let me read you the text. It's really beautiful. They're singing sort of their memories to go back to their homeland, and the text is, "Fly away on gentle breezes, fly swiftly, songs of love, to greet our homeland, where once we lived in hope and knew no sorrow, where once we sang rejoicing in our freedom." So it's this nostalgia for the homeland, which is just really beautiful. It's great music, and features every section of the orchestra, especially the woodwinds, who get a workout in this whole concert. And, you know, I think it's a very similar style to the Shostakovich, which of course came later, 1945, at the end of the so-called Great Patriotic War, which we call here in the West, we call the World War II. So right at the end of it, fascinating, you know, the whole life of Stalin and Shostakovich, and that clash between them, and yet at the same time Shostakovich being used as a tool of the Soviet Union, because he had such influence around the world. We don't have time to even get into all of that, but everyone expected, including Stalin, Shostakovich to write a grand Ninth Symphony like Beethoven. And, you know, the newspapers even expected that, and he was kind of playing into that, actually. But what he ended up writing was an anti-ninth, full of humor and levity, and, you know, inspired by Haydn, which was a very dangerous thing for him to do. He managed to survive that particular episode, but it's a really complicated piece, even though it's 27 minutes long. It deals with so many different emotions, and it's full of jokes. There's a joke in the first movement about the trombone has this little fanfare, pam pa, and first time he gets it right, but then in the end of the piece, he keeps coming in the wrong place. And ba ba, no, that's not right yet. Ba ba, and he does it 7 times before he finally manages to hit the right place. So that's hilarious already. The very nature of the piece is hilarious in that it's a joke at this pompous and dramatic Ninth Symphony model that came before. So it's a practically a concerto for the bassoon in the woodwinds. There's so much depth in this piece. We come to the pre-concert talk. I'll tell you
Okay.
people out there because there's a lot more to discuss there. And then we're going to put the Tchaikovsky concerto, violin concerto, at the end of the concert, which I think is nice because it's practically a symphony. It's a 30-minute long piece of music, very symphonic in its writing. One of the best known pieces I think of all time. It did not have a very good beginning to its life.
Okay.
The dedicatee Leopold Auer turned it down, said that this is not good enough. Well, let me clarify. People think that he said this is unplayable,
Right.
but
That's what the
that's
story I've heard.
yeah, it's not exactly what he said. He actually clarified it on his own time. He said it was just sometimes unidiomatic, and maybe to better achieve the composer's desired effect, some alterations needed to be made. So he actually did provide some alterations, which are used today. Um, but also, the cliche is that it was just very hard to play, and I think about the 4 minute mile and how that used to be this impossible benchmark, and now.
So, reminder the concert is this weekend at Maumelle High School. And the pre-concert talks take place an hour before, so 6:30 on Saturday and then 2 p.m. on Sunday. I believe the pre-concert talk takes place inside the concert hall on this one because it's Maumelle. And Andrew's back with us.
I'm gonna blame the hotel Wi-Fi. I'm not
Yeah.
what's going on here. Sorry about
Yeah, no, sorry about that. Yeah.
where was
Um, we were okay, we talked about the trombones and then how it was dangerous to do this.
did we not even get to Tchaikovsky in this
Oh yeah. No, sorry. We
Yeah.
were talking about Tchaikovsky. We were talking about Tchaikovsky and how the playable, unplayable, or he tweaked it, or why it's at the end. Yes, we got through a little bit of yes.
Yeah, I mean, Tchaikovsky will, I think, speak for itself. I was talking about how it's like the 4 minute mile and how now everybody can do it, and and every high schooler plays this piece now, and that doesn't mean it's not, well, not every high schooler.
I
The
was
ta
like, oh my gosh. I mean, okay.
the first movement, you got the most talented high school kids can manage this now, and of
Okay.
course, it's still a challenge to people until the end of their life. So I think that's one of the reasons it's stayed is it is accessible, and yet it's endlessly full of depth, and it's such a showpiece. And Shannon Lee is someone I've already collaborated with in Ohio. She's really a rising star and just a really great style and sound. So it's going to be wonderful, and yeah, it's a great way to close the concert. I think it is a symphony, like I said, this concerto. So it's a nice program. I think it's all sort of the same style and sound with some different expeditions within that sound, but it's nice to do that sometimes to kind of stay in the same style.
Okay, great. Um, yeah. Well, and you can't go wrong with ending with Tchaikovsky's violin concerto with somebody that knows how to play it.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
think about that 4 minute mile. I mean, there's still only some people that can do that 4 minute mile.
Yeah, it's still quite difficult, but at
It
some
is
point
still quite
it
difficult.
was seen as ridiculous or impossible, and we have that human progress.
Yeah. Um, okay, here's a question. You mentioned the broad range of music your parents listened to. Do you think this has impacted how you approach season programming? And what do you listen to in your free time now as an adult?
Another good question. Yeah, it absolutely has affected, and I do not think my parents are watching this video now, so I can say what I want. No, it's absolutely. I mean, for example, I always tell the story that my mom would quiz me growing up on the voices. I would have to identify the voices of Ella Fitzgerald, Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, and Nina Simone,
Oh,
which now I expect everyone should be able to do that. Like, what? You can't tell the difference? So to me, yeah, the idea that music is music, and that of course, we want to play Beethoven and Brahms, but there's so much music that belongs in the concert hall. I'm not just talking about like bringing pops into a classics concert. You know, we don't need to put necessarily Prince with Debussy, but there are so many styles, and the good thing about modern contemporary music is that it often utilizes a lot of those styles. You think of someone like Mason Bates, who uses electronic music. Um, Not someone I've programmed that often, but just as an example.
Hmm.
But I do really like putting jazz in the concert hall. You know, I mentioned William Grant Still kind of toys sometimes, plays with that idiom, but there are great pieces of music for orchestra by Duke Ellington. You know, you think of Gershwin, who was inspired by all of those sounds. But in my spare time, I mean, I used to listen to a lot of classical music until it became my many hours a day task to learn this music. And so mostly I listen to it now as research, or I listen to a lot of chamber music, I'll put it that way, string quartets. I think that's because I don't get to perform that stuff, so that I learn a lot from that. But outside of that world, I like so many things. I mean, I like the 60s a lot. I like a lot of French music from the 60s. I like the Beatles. I grew up listening to the Beatles. I still love them. I listen to a lot of jazz, Coltrane, Miles Davis. I listen to Radiohead. I was listening to Stereolab earlier. I like Bjork. You know, I like Lizzo. I like everything. So it's every time period has these great, really great people. I just, Silk Sonic just won that Grammy. I didn't know about them until that. I knew Anderson Paak really well, actually, as a side artist, and I really loved his stuff. So yeah, I tend to like music that has complexity and interesting harmony, and that's hard to find sometimes in pop music. Or if it is there, it's just imitating an older style, you know. So to find those really unique artists today is a challenge. But one of the people I go to often is Radiohead. You know, they're always innovating.
Okay, Radiohead.
Yeah.
All right, we're out of time. Um, okay, we're out of time. There's a couple more questions, but maybe they'll come up at Brown Bag. Or we were talking about possibly doing a talk back at one of the concerts too. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get a little long in my conversation, but they've been great questions. So thanks to everyone for listening. And yeah, please come to the talk and hopefully the concert as well.
Yes. Yes. Again, thank you all so much for joining. Andrew, thank you so much for being here with us today, and yeah, for this really interesting and fun conversation. So, all right. Thank you guys. And this will be bring your friends to the concert. There's still some tickets left.
Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye bye.